share this with those who couldn't make it, including the family, one of the families that donated an awful lot of the financing for a possible project, that be the Stevens. The last I heard, he was still living in Japan, is that right? Okay, so as you know, Judy Stevens, Elsie Ackery, donated, upon their passing, their estates donated to the church to use as we saw fit. We took a group, we called it the Bequest Group, and we started to brainstorm, what would you do with these funds? One of the things that came out of that usage was to install solar here for a long-term financial benefit and also a green benefit. That's how we get here. The group that's an advisory group right now is working on the who. Who would we want to have do this? Doug has graciously agreed to give me some advice and advise us as we move forward. The goal is for consistory to make a decision. We hope to give them a proposal at their next meeting on the 25th. So that's sort of the timeline of where we're headed. We got there by canvassing local churches who have already done this. What were their pitfalls? What were the advantages, etc. The one church referred me to a video that featured Doug. This is Mr. Doug Neidig from Greenworks. I think you're going to enjoy this, but they referred me to a video and I went, I got to talk to him. And I did, and he answered, which was just even fantastic. He's answered 2 or 3 times, actually. So here we are, and I finally got enough guts to invite him to come talk, and he's here, and I'd like to introduce Mr. Doug Neidig. And by the way, his bio was in your bulletin this morning. I'm not going to reread it, but it was there. Is that okay with you?
That's great with me.
Okay. There you go. Thank you.
Steve, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's here. This is a great sized group to stick around on a Sunday morning to talk. As Steve mentioned, I'm Doug Neidig. I'm with Greenworks Development. Greenworks and our partner SRE Renewables, they're in Mechanicsburg, I'm in Harrisburg. We're the largest commercial solar developer in Pennsylvania. Solar is residential solar, then you gravitate up kind of to what's called behind the meter or distributed generation solar, and then on the very high end is utility grade solar, utility scale solar, and that's the big solar farms that everybody gets all up in arms about. So we don't do residential, and we really don't do smaller projects like this one, Steve. And this is a smaller project relative to some of the things that I'll talk to you about. Steve and I talked, and I said this is a little bit on the smaller side for us, but I'd love to talk with you. I'd love to consult with you and help any way that I can. So we don't do residential. We don't do the really big utility scale stuff. We do everything in between. And I'll show you some of that in a couple of minutes. That means schools, that means businesses, that means floating solar arrays in New Jersey. We last year finished the largest floating solar array in the country. It's an 8.9 megawatt, 20-acre floating solar array. Kind of fun stuff. Can't do that kind of thing in Pennsylvania because electricity values are higher in Jersey than they are in Pennsylvania, and what are called SRECs that I'll talk to you about in a minute, solar renewable energy credits, are much, much higher in New Jersey than they are in Pennsylvania. And when you do a solar project and you're competing against heavily subsidized fossil fuels, which is the way this game works, you need the incentives in order to be able to make this stuff pencil. So in New Jersey, under a Republican governor years ago, Chris Christie, when he was the governor, who was the one who really managed their solar project or their solar programs really well, he got their SREC values up to where they needed to be to compete. And New Jersey's not a fossil fuel gas state, so that meant that their electricity costs were more expensive. There's why I can do things like that in New Jersey that hopefully at some point I'll be able to do in Pennsylvania. Things like parking canopy solar, where you put a canopy over a parking lot in order to be able to power the building that the parking lot services, but also shade the cars and shade the black macadam parking lot so it doesn't absorb all kinds of heat and radiate that heat into the building. That's the kind of thing I can do in New Jersey, or if I were in California, I could do it in California, or I could do it in Massachusetts. Because of policy, I can't do that in Pennsylvania yet because of the way that we're structured. But we're getting there, and I'll talk to you about that in a couple of minutes. This slide, that word is conversation. I'd really like this to be a conversation, not just me standing up here talking. When you've got questions, let me know. This fascinates me. This is the first thing I'd like any group to know about solar, is that every hour the amount of energy that hits the planet from the sun is roughly about the same amount of energy that the whole planet uses in a year. And I'd like to sit on that for a second before I move on. By the time we're done talking this morning, the amount of energy that will have hit the planet from the sun is the same as every truck that's on the road, every heating and cooling system that's running, every light that's on, every cat video that's stored and shared, all the stuff that takes energy, all that energy that we use in a flipping year all over the world is gonna hit the earth from the sun by the time we're done talking in an hour. And yet we're in this big conversation about which way we should go with all of this, and it's this big political debate. And the poorest 2 billion people on the planet, going on 3 to 4 billion if you follow the science, are directly in the crosshairs of the changes that we are instituting by following the energy paths that we've been on for 150 years. We can't get out of that mindset because there's a lot of money involved in this stuff, and yet every hour, the amount of energy that hits the planet from the sun is the same as we use in a year. And the big argument when you listen to politicians, especially in a state like this one, who are gas fueled, the big argument is, well, what do you do when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow? And the simple answer to that is battery storage, and we're working on that. Any new product that's developed, that's ever been developed, has a cost curve. It starts really, really high when it's a really new product and you're not making much of it yet, and it gradually gets less expensive until it goes way out here on the trailing end of the low cost curve. Solar, over the last 15, 20 years, is way out here. It's as cheap as you can get it. When I graduated from Steel High in 1975, the cost of solar was $101 a watt for panels. I'm buying panels right now at 28 cents a watt. They were $101 a watt when I got out of high school, and I'm old, but I'm not that old yet. When I got out of high school, it was $101 a watt. It's down to 28 cents a watt, and all the rest of the components of the system, the racking, all the other stuff you need, the inverters, the bidirectional chargers, the costs of all that have come down. Solar's way out here on the cost curve. The cost of batteries is about there. If I trail it out, it's about there. And 2022 was the year of the electric car. I've got my electric car sitting out in the parking lot. I've been driving electric for the last 5 years, and electric cars are really proliferating globally at this point. And that means that there's going to be a lot more batteries produced because we've got a lot more electric cars. That's going to drive the cost of batteries down here. Once we get to that point, what happens when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow goes away. And that's going to be an interesting piece when the politicians who are fighting against this stuff can't give you those simple arguments, right? There's a senator, and I don't want to get into too much of the politics of this, but there are a couple of senators in the state legislature that are, we have this conversation going on, and they can't get off of that track, and yet they're not facing reality. But when I walk into the Capitol, and I spend about 4 or 5 hours a month in the Capitol every month talking about solar policy, excuse me, when I walk into the Capitol, you can smell the gas money in that building because it's everywhere. I mean, that legislature is funded by it. And so here we are in this conversation with the poorest 2 to 4 billion people on the planet in the crosshairs of climate change. Interesting conversation. It fascinates me that the faith-based community has not been leading this conversation, and to some extent it does, and it's great to see a group like this come out today, but it should be a bigger issue than it is, because it is the poorest couple of billion people on the planet, a lot of whom are already feeling this, that are in the crosshairs. Easy for me to get on a soapbox and do sermons about this, my apologies for that up front. Here's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. This is Pennsylvania electricity production, and this is gas, 55%. I'm going to step over here so you can see it. Actually, I'm going to do that, so I'll be smarter about it. You can't see it on the screen. Here's coal, and coal's fading away. And the way that the trajectory we're on right now is that as coal fades away, it's about 25% of the portfolio right now. As coal fades away, gas is gonna take over that piece of the pie, the way it's looking right now. This is nuclear. Nuclear's on a down slope. There's not a lot of nuclear plants going on right now. TMI's got its issues, the whole 9 yards. That's starting to go away. The trajectory that we're on right now in Pennsylvania, that we've been on up until last week, and I'll talk to you about that in a second, is that this is gonna take over all of that. You know, if we continue on the current path, we're gonna be an entirely gas-fired electricity state in the next 10 years. You can argue that that's a better thing than when this used to dominate about that much of Pennsylvania's production. And I agree with that. Gas is cleaner energy than coal. Those are all fossil fuels. The fact that we've cleaned up significantly our energy production and use over the last 20 years to 25 years by switching from this to that is significant, and that's the end of the argument for a lot of legislators, and it's really not the end of the argument. When you look at a continuum from dirty energy to clean energy, and coal and wood are over here, and renewables are here, gas is about there. So we've gotten from there to there, that's a big deal, and legislators make a big deal about that. We need to go all the way home. This doesn't get you there. So there's the first thing I wanted you to know. Second thing I wanted you to know is that capacity installed on the East Coast by state, we're not doing great. I just spoke in the Capitol 2 months ago about the fact that Pennsylvania actually, over the last 10 years in solar adoption, ranks dead last in the country. And that's a scary place to be. When you look at carbon dioxide emissions though, we're doing really well. We're in 4th place. That's not the place you want to be leading the group, and there's our problem. When you look at where Pennsylvania is in its renewable mandates, every state in the union, and I'm just getting over a cold right now, my apologies. Every state in the union has a renewables mandate. The state decides how much of a target for renewables it's going to set by certain years, and that's called an alternative energy portfolio standard in Pennsylvania currently. We are currently at 8% mandate by 2021. That's the current law that we operate under. That law sets the target for renewables at 8%, and it's gradually been increasing up to the full 8% renewables by 2019 actually was the original law. And we hit that in 2019, and now more solar projects are coming into the game, and we've got a stated target for those renewables, and that means the value of these green certificates that I'll talk to you about in a minute has been declining in Pennsylvania. That's not a great thing, and I'll talk to you, well, so every other state around us, except Ohio, which is also a gas state, I left them off the map, has renewable targets of 70%, 50%, 25, 100, 150, most way, way higher than Pennsylvania's. Governor Shapiro last Tuesday morning just announced a 35% renewables target by 2035 in Pennsylvania. That's big. Josh Shapiro is a Democratic governor who has aspirations to move about 2 hours south of here. And if he doesn't put some sort of renewables win on his resume in the next year or 2 or 3, that's not gonna happen. That move's not gonna happen. He's gonna have to settle for other jobs here. That's a motivator for someone like him. I've been fighting solar policy for the last 6, 7 years in the Capitol, trying to push things forward, trying to get that gray, I intentionally made Pennsylvania gray, trying to get that gray to look more like Virginia, bright yellow, and get our renewables mandate up. It's gonna take a governor who's got other aspirations to make that happen, and that's what's going on right now, so that's a good thing. Question?
Can the governor did the governor do that by himself? Or
No,
does
it's
he
not
need
going to legislature. You can't do it by, you could argue that he could maybe do an executive order, and that's always the best. He's got to go to the legislature. The Republicans have responded already. Here we go, right? Democrats are for renewable energy. Republicans are for fossil fuels. It's the way it works. I'm not advocating either one or downplaying either one, but that's the way it works. So the Republican legislature has responded to say they want to work with the governor to make it for a more commonsensical or a better approach. I know what the word better means in that context, and I'm waiting to see how that happens while I'm trying to help the conversation in the right direction as much as I can. It's going to be a battle. It's a great question, and the first question is always the toughest when the other questions usually follow. So how does solar work? When you look at a solar panel, I've been doing work in R&D on a nanotech-based solar cell for the last 18 years now with a professor at Penn State University Park who wrote the book on solar cell device physics. And it's pretty interesting stuff that the way a solar panel works, if you took a cross-section through a solar panel, you've got I'll be simple about it, you've got a semiconductor material in that solar panel that's the same semiconductor material that makes this that makes this supercomputer that I'm carrying in my pocket work. That same semiconductor material is the semiconductor material that's in every solar cell. In that case, that semiconductor material turns photons of energy, sunlight, into electrons, into electricity. And it's solid state. There are no moving parts in a solar panel. So the upshot of that, when you don't have any moving parts in a solar panel, is that these guys will be, if you buy the right panels, and that's one of the first rules that we'll talk about in a little bit, is you've got to go with tier 1 panels, tier 1 rated panels that typically carry 25 to 30-year power output warranties with them. It's hard to find a 30-year warranty on anything. You know, a 5-year warranty is a big deal anymore with the way things are made. These things will carry a 30-year warranty that if you don't get 80% of the original rated output out of any given panel over a 30-year period, if you buy a tier 1 panel, the manufacturer will replace that panel free of cost to you. They don't give you a 30-year warranty unless they know that those panels will last a lot longer than that. And solar, the first solar panel was sold in 1954. It's older than I am. It was sold in 1954. There's lots of data on the reliability and the life expectancy of solar because it's been around so long. It's been around for almost 70 years. You'll get meaningful amounts of electricity out of a solar array that's installed 50 years later. So all of the cash analyses that I do on projects when we launch them for schools and hospitals and businesses and municipalities, we do 40-year cash flow analyses knowing that we're still well within the 50-year expected life. So no moving parts to a panel, tier 1 rated panels is what you want, that's the way to go. Here's how it works. You put all these guys on a roof or on the ground, and I'll show you some of each in a couple of minutes. You put them on the roof or on the ground. When you put them on a roof, if it's a sloped roof, you've got to screw them to the roof, and that's probably what you're going to have to do here. If it's a flat roof, these things just sit on the roof, and they're weighted down about 5 pounds per square foot on the roof to weight them down. Those things are weighted. They don't penetrate the roof. You don't screw them down to a flat roof, and they're rated to 120 mile per hour winds, which in this area is still okay. You know, 20 years from now, maybe not so much, but in this area, 120 mile an hour wind will still get you there. They're weighted, they don't affect the roof integrity. As a matter of fact, we'll, with a flat roof system, work with the roof manufacturer of the owner of the system to make sure that the roof warranty is not affected at all, because they just sit up there. Once you put them all on the roof, you wire them all together, you run that down into an inverter, and an inverter is a device that turns DC electricity, the direct current electricity that an array will produce, into alternating current, into AC electricity that you can use. That's what's coming out of the wall. It turns it into AC. You run that then through a bidirectional meter that'll run either backward or forward, and you run that out to the grid. The backward and forward meter is a good thing because let's take a school, for instance. This is a school building, and I'm in the middle of July, school's not in right now. I'm producing a ton of electricity because it's the middle of July. School's not in and I'm not using a lot of electricity. I'm going to take all that excess electricity and push it off to the grid. In Pennsylvania, under our current law, I'm going to sell that electricity to the grid at the same full retail value that I'll buy electricity from when I'm using electricity and not generating my own, at the same value that you're buying it for now. So Pennsylvania net metering law means I buy and sell electricity across my bidirectional meter at the same cost. And when you think about it, the upshot of that is that the grid is now my battery, right? If I can push it to the grid when I'm making it and not using it, and pull it from the grid when I'm using but not making it, right, or during a blizzard, the grid has become my battery because I can store it and then bring it back in at the same cost. I don't need to put battery systems in place in Pennsylvania with solar arrays at this point. I don't want to, unless I have a hospital use where I want to make, or a backup generator use, or I want to make sure I've got demand even if the grid's not supplying to me. That's the only reason in Pennsylvania right now that I want to put a battery in place. Other than that, cost-wise, I don't want to just about double the cost of my system by putting battery storage in place if the grid's sitting there ready to store any excess that I generate that I'm not using at that time. Is that fair? Question?
How many states have the net metering?
I think it's about 32 states that have net metering, and it's in different flavors. In some cases, it's full retail like it is in Pennsylvania. In other cases, it's 75% of retail. It depends on the state law. There are legislators in Pennsylvania that would love to take net metering out in Pennsylvania entirely because, you know, they've got their own reasons, but because that would take solar out entirely. And, you know, there is a lot of gas money in the Capitol building in Harrisburg. They would love to take solar out at this point. One of my goals as a kind of a part-time lobbyist for renewable energy policy is to keep net metering policy in place long enough for battery costs to come down. Because once battery costs come down to the point where I can put a really low cost, high storage, effective, reliable battery system in place every time I put solar in place, the legislators can do whatever they want to do with net metering policy, right? Because I don't need the grid anymore to store, I can store on site. We're not there yet, but battery costs are actively coming down, and I watch that all the time. Every new electric car that hits the road effectively drives battery costs down a little bit further.
But if Shapiro gets that policy passed through with a higher level of solar mandate or renewable mandate, then the net metering is beneficial for the utility companies. Because they get that back on their grid, they get to count that towards the percentage.
Well, they do, but yes, they do.
So I'm saying it's a benefit.
Yep.
I mean, I
Sure.
don't see net
But, yeah,
metering
but
going away.
there's probably a political red flag involved with that.
There are arguments about, yes. So the problem there is that the gas industry, the coal industry, the gas industry, the fossil fuel industry in general loses, right?
But the utility, who's the ones that are mandated, that has to hit that, needs the
Yes.
renewables.
Follow the money.
Yeah.
Where's the bigger money? That's the
Wow.
deal, right? With any of these things, and it fascinates me, you have to look to see where the money is and follow that money, and that's gonna be the reason why things are gonna drive in one direction or the other direction. Part of the problem we've got in renewables at this point is that only 4% of Pennsylvania right now is powered by renewables. That's not a big lobby, right? When you've got gas and oil that are 80%, especially gas, with the money that Pennsylvania's just thrown out right at the gas industry, $600 million at a copy, here, just take this, take that. With that kind of money and the kind of revenues that they're able to generate, they got a lot of political power. So when I walk into a legislator's office, who's one of the chairs of one of the committees that's responsible for some of these decisions, and I look at the bookshelf, I walked into a legislator's office who was a pretty hard right legislator here, and I walk into his office, and the first book I saw on the bookshelf staring at me was called Green Fraud. And I thought, okay, here we go, we're gonna talk. That's the world we're in right now, but it's a world that's got some big issues with it in terms of energy issues, right?
One other quick question.
Sure.
So net metering then includes both generation and the distribution cost together?
When I do a solar it's a good question. When I do a solar project, I can offset 100% of generation costs, so that when you look at your electric bill, you're gonna see all the itemized stuff on your bill. It's generation, distribution, transmission, and then all the other fees that they throw in just for good measure. I can offset 100% of generation when I do a solar project, and I can offset about 30%, 35% of distribution and transmission. The balance of that, the 65 or 70%, stays with the utility, and that's justifiably their cost that they need in order to be able to maintain the grid. So there's the way solar projects work. I can save the bulk, the vast majority of the energy costs coming into a building. I can't save it all because somebody's got to be there to get that power on and off to you. When battery costs get cheap enough and I can put battery storage in place on any site to be able to take care of the energy storage on that site, I can drop that utility cost down. And that day will come, I hope, right? So here's that chart that I was telling you about a while ago. I graduated from Steel High in 1975, $101 per watt for panels in 1975. We are now in 2024, and you can't even see it at this point, I'm down to 28 cents per watt for panels. When I put solar on the roof of our Campus Square building in Midtown Harrisburg, Greenworks is doing a lot of redevelopment in Midtown Harrisburg around 3rd and Riley. When I put solar on the roof of one of our commercial buildings in 2008, I put a 42 kW, 42,000 watt system on the roof, and it cost me almost $400,000 to put 42 kW on the roof. It was $6.92 a watt. When I turned around and filled the rest of that same roof in 2019 with the rest of the solar that I could fit up there, instead of $400,000 for 42 kW, I put up 48 kW more than I did initially, cost me $92,000 in 2019 versus 2008. In 11 years, I went from $6.92 a watt to about $1.60. That's a huge drop in 10 years, and that's where the industry has gone. So we're way out there and almost down to dead flat in cost of solar. And about 2005, you can see when the last bit of cost came out of solar is when installation took off. And it looks like solar's taken over the world, but that's a relative chart. If I showed you, where gas was at the time and where other fossil fuel energy was at the time, it's up through the roof and into the clouds. This is taken off, but it's still that much of that. There's the problem.
I have a question.
Sure.
What's the difference between clean energy
Yep.
and solar?
Solar is clean energy. Solar is one of the types of clean energy. And it's a great question. And there really are a couple of legitimate places where there is completely clean energy. It's solar, it's wind, and you could argue that it's hydro, and you could argue that it's nuclear. Solar and wind are the only two completely inarguable clean energy sources, right?
Renewable, clean can be gas. Clean can be gas. Right?
So if I'm sitting talking to a Republican legislator,
I'm just saying, I got a grant from the state for natural gas microturbines.
This is all
That's clean energy.
semantics. We're talking definitions and policy.
Right, renewable, I think is what you just said.
Renewable.
They're also clean, obviously.
I'm gonna argue that clean is clean. So when I talk to a legislator who says, and I'm in there, he knows talking about solar policy, it's almost always a he. Well, we're in a gas state and gas is clean energy, right? So if we're in a gas state and gas is clean energy, then why am I having this conversation with you? We're good. Gas is clean energy if you promote the fact that gas is clean energy. Again, coal and oil, wind and solar, gas is the way that the clean, the dirty spectrum works. You've got to make up your mind and close one eye to say gas is clean energy. It's cleaner energy.
Yeah, for sure.
And legislators will argue that it's clean, and I'll argue right back, no, it's not, right?
Your question to
Sure.
follow that, and I was gonna wait till the end, but you brought it up. I know that Governor Hochul is very much into electric. I mean, so much so that she's even talked about banning gas stoves, which I have to say, I like my gas stove.
My
But I
wife and I
would-
have this conversation frequently.
I-
I will win this at some point.
But on the other hand, we pay incredibly high electric in New York, incredibly high. And, she's trying to offset that by doing more solar.
Yes.
And they're all over, and we pay for New York City, even though we're far, far away.
Understand.
It's one of the biggest cities, obviously uses a lot of electric. So I do promote solar. But when you're in an area, let's say the Catskill Mountains or the foothills of the Adirondacks, and you've got the dairy farms that have sold out, to wind, is wind, and maybe on a smaller scale like here, I'm not talking windmills here, but is wind and from what you know, because you analyze the data, is wind as energy efficient as solar?
Wind is energy efficient, and I'm gonna be honest, I can't directly compare the
Okay,
efficiency
sure,
of wind
sure.
to solar.
I should look.
Well, the problem with wind, and you have to, there's a lot of definitions involved in this.
Yes.
You have to look at where you can put wind. Wind is typically only applicable on ridges of mountains, offshore, and in the Great Plains. If you've ever taken, what is it, Route 40 out to Colorado, and you go through Kansas and then eastern Colorado, you are in a wind turbine forest. It's phenomenal, phenomenal. And while my son and I was taking him out to Denver, he moved out to Denver about 5 years ago, while we're out there and we're going through the wind turbine forest, and you gotta see it, if you haven't seen it, you gotta see it or look it up. We're looking this up, and they've got projections, the state of Kansas, on how long it's gonna be until they'd be able to power the whole country from the wind farms in the Great Plains, because it's windy all the time in the Great Plains, right? That's what caused the Dust Bowl, part of what caused the Dust Bowl. That's phenomenal, but the problem, one of the downsides of wind is that I can only really effectively put it in the Great Plains, out, offshore and on ridge lines, on mountains where there's wind, and then I've got to distribute it everywhere else that I need it to be. The advantage of solar is that I can put solar up almost everywhere that I use energy, right? Yeah, all the mass, everything around you is created by sunlight. It's photosynthesis, basically. It's sunlight hitting trees, creating mass. That's how you grow trees, is sunlight hitting the trees, and photosynthesis turns that energy into mass. It's kind of the reverse of Einstein's theory, right? E equals mc squared, and energy can turn into mass as well as mass can turn into energy and create a nuclear bomb. When you can power every tree by the photosynthetic effect that's built into that tree, and create mass everywhere that photosynthesis occurs, that's a really good thing, and that's what's grown the world. When we can power every building, every entity by a power system that's sitting on that entity, that makes a lot more sense, because there's a lot of energy loss in distributing energy. When you generate it here and move it over to there in order to use it, you typically lose 30 to 40% in translation. So one of the advantages of solar is it can be ubiquitous, almost ubiquitous. These are great questions. Here's the reason why you want to go solar as St. Thomas UCC. I'll show you a couple of projects in a couple of minutes, a couple of schools that we turned on in November of 2020, and those projects made sense. We spent time with the school board and with the administration justifying those projects and going through the numbers, and they moved forward and we started building, and we turned those systems on in November of 2020. And we turned those systems on just before electricity costs in Pennsylvania started going through the roof. And I'm showing you PPL's curve, but the Med-Ed curve looks a lot like that. The Penelec curve looks a lot like that. West Penn does too. Energy costs in Pennsylvania started rising like crazy. The deal is that about 5-6 years ago, the technology evolved to the point where you can liquefy natural gas that we frack out of the ground, and we used to not be able to go anywhere else with it. All of a sudden, you can liquefy the stuff and ship it to Europe, where it's 4 or 5 times more valuable than it is here. And if you're a gas company, you're going to do that, right? And what that did was that it put Pennsylvania, that used to be in this insulated energy bubble because you couldn't ship it anywhere else, and that's why you were getting 4, 5, 6 cents a kilowatt hour for electricity costs. It took us out of that bubble and put us on a global market. When Nadine and I were driving around in Provence a couple of years ago, and we're on the highway, and I said, how many trucks do you see on the highway? And we're looking back and forth, and there are 0 trucks on the highway with us, and there's a couple of trucks out on the highway around here. If you look around when you're on the highway, I said, why do you think the reason for that is? And we talked about it, and the reason for that is that it's too flippin' expensive to truck things in Europe because fuel is too expensive. So you put things on trains and you ship it all over the place by train, and then you have vans and smaller trucks take it to where you need it. In the US, we've made it a religion almost that you gotta have almost free energy costs, because everybody needs to be able to do whatever they need to do and put trucks on the road in the whole 9 yards. The global market doesn't necessarily look at things that way. And now Pennsylvania is on a global market with its gas, and that's what's driving electricity costs. So I'm still talking to a number of school boards who are waiting for that kind of 15 cent, now down to 12 cent, but it's gonna go back up. that kind of 12, 15 cent per kilowatt hour electricity cost to go back down to 5 or 6 cents because they're convinced over years of experience that that's just what electricity costs. And the bottom line is that if you look under the covers a little bit, we're in a global market. We're never going to get back to 5 cents a kilowatt hour electricity anywhere. If you're in California right now, peak time of day, they use time of day pricing because electricity is expensive out there and they've got all their own energy issues. Peak time of day in California right now, you can spend 45 cents a kilowatt hour on electricity. In Hawaii, it's every day, it's 35 cents a kilowatt hour. California, 45 cents peak time of day. Pennsylvania looks at it as the end of the world, that 5 cents just went to 15. You go to the West Coast, it's 3 times that peak time of day already. And we're looking at that as the end of the world, but you've got to kind of keep all this in perspective. And so that's the reason to go solar. And this is where Pennsylvania is going to start getting closer to the kind of projects that I can do in New Jersey. When electricity costs get more valuable, and if the governor is successful with his 35% renewables by 2035 bill, that's going to double or triple the value of green certificates. I'll be able to do parking lot solar in the next couple of years here, hopefully. And that's a good thing. I saw another question.
What's the time frame on that?
Sorry, yep. This is November of 2020, and that's May of 2024. And I'm waiting for the next shoe to fall now to see where it's going. There's a lot of detail, and my apologies for that. I'm going to try to keep this to an hour. Any more questions? So what are SRECs? We talked about SRECs a couple of times already. I wanted to make sure that I had a slide in here that talked you through them. SRECs are solar renewable energy certificates, so that when you do a solar project and you put that solar project up, you're going to save money directly on your electricity. That's typically 9, 10, 11 cents a kilowatt hour in Pennsylvania right now. So you'll save direct electricity costs on that solar when you put it up. In parallel with that, you're also going to generate solar renewable energy credits. Every megawatt hour, every 1,000 kilowatt hours of solar that you produce, you'll get a certificate. It's like generating a stock certificate every month when you generate solar generated electricity. And you can sell those things on a supply and demand market in Pennsylvania, or you can hold them for up to 3 years if you think the market's going to go up. And if I'm holding certificates right now, and the governor just announced an 8% going up to 35% renewable energy plan for Pennsylvania, I'm holding those certificates because if those things double or triple in value over the next 3 years and you sell them later, you'll make 2 or 3 times the money. So those certificates are green certificates. You're selling your greenness. Pennsylvania has mandated to its utilities that it has to produce a certain amount of solar by certain times. If it doesn't, and they can either do it themselves, the utilities, or they can show up with these certificates at the end of every year. If they don't show up with those certificates, they don't tend to produce it themselves. They buy the certificates for different reasons. If they don't show up with enough certificates at the end of every year, the penalty is twice the value of the certificates. So it makes sense for them to show up with those certificates. When the governor is successful with taking 8% renewable mandates up to 35%, that could double or triple the value of those certificates, and that could wind up making this column more valuable than that column, while this column, the electricity column, for the reasons we talked about a second ago, is going to go up on its own. So when electricity cost is going to keep going up, and the governor is going to mandate 35% instead of 8% renewables, and take this kind of solar from 0.5% of total generation up to 2.5 to 3.5%, which is the way it's going to work per the numbers, that's going to make good things happen for SREC values. So the addition of electricity cost or electricity value and SREC value is how you justify things like parking canopy solar and floating solar that I showed you, and we're on a path to get there at this point, which is kind of cool. That's the reason why you want to go solar as a church, as a residence, as a business, as a not-for-profit, as a school, as a hospital. You want to go solar now, because everything, when you look at it, is leaning toward higher electricity costs and higher SREC value, and big time higher in both cases. A couple of projects types of projects that we've done, just to give you a feel for what's going on. And for the most part, I tried to keep projects kind of sort of local around here so that you can see what we're doing. This is Masonic Villages in Elizabethtown. This went years back where we did the first megawatt This is about a megawatt. It's about 2.5, 3 acres of solar that we did on the ground for Masonic Villages probably 7 years ago now. They called us 2 years later and they said the numbers look phenomenal. We'd like to go from 1 megawatt to 3 megawatts to get up closer to 100% of our electricity offset. So that's a 3 megawatt system that you're seeing now, 3 million watts of power. And that is the largest solar energy system built on a retirement community in the world at Masonic Villages in Elizabethtown.
How much acreage did you need for that?
For the whole 2.93 megawatts, we needed 8 acres. Not terrible. The only advantage to waiting to go solar until later, and I'll have electricity consultants that are selling electricity to schools constantly tell business managers, if you just wait 10 years, it'll be so much cheaper that you'll be able to do the same project for half the cost. Not the case. The only advantage would be that the density, the amount of electricity that I can get out of any individual panel is gonna go up some, and even that's slowing down now. So maybe that 8 acres might turn into 7.5. That's not a reason not to go solar now. That's the only advantage. It's not gonna get any cheaper per watt. It might get a little bit more dense. You'd be able to fit more into the same area.
So, what happens when it snows?
When it snows, these things are all at an angle. These are at a 25-degree angle. On the roof, they'd be at a 10-degree angle. When it snows, these things are designed to absorb energy. That's what they're for. They pick up energy right away. That tends to, well, they get warm. That makes the snow slide off of them. In this area, you never need to go up and clear the snow from your panels. You never need to really clean your panels. Rain will take care of that for you. If you're in Las Vegas and you get dust storms, maybe you want to wash them down every now and then. In this area, it just sits there and generates electricity.
What about tornadoes?
Tornadoes are things that you can avoid if you put up more renewable electricity. For the most part, until we put up enough that we start to decrease the number of tornadoes, tornadoes will take solar arrays out, but they'll take buildings out and people out too. And that's part of the reason why we ought to put up a lot more solar. Right? Those are the kinds of reasons that have the poorest 2 billion people on the planet in the crosshairs of solar. It's either those kinds of storms that are typically along coastlines, or it's rising sea levels, and most of the population of the world lives along coastlines. And if we don't get our act together in the next 30, 40 years, we got big time problems on our hands. When I talk to engineering groups or technical groups or student groups in the area or in the Mid-Atlantic, and I do a lot of this, I tell them that it's a fascinating time to be an engineer. I used to be in electronics. I sold the business back in 2005, went into energy and education. Those are my 2 buttons, because it's a fascinating time to be an engineer in energy systems at this point, because we as a global society are in a horse race, right? We're trying to get to these sorts of renewable energy systems quickly enough that we can head off the disaster that we're creating. Just read a great book called Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. Sapiens was a really well publicized book, and it's the history of the human species and where we're going. And in the book, he says, as a species, we're either headed for technological paradise or ecological disaster. And it is one of the two. There is no in between. It's either going to be technological paradise because we pulled it off, or ecological disaster because we haven't gotten there yet. It's a scary time, but it's a fascinating time to be an engineer in energy systems. This is why after I sold the business, I wanted to go into energy systems right away. This is where I'd rather spend my time. This is the Midwest School District up in Middleburg, about an hour north and a little bit west of here. Midwest is a 2,500 student school. This array offsets 110% now of their electricity use. It's a 7-acre array behind all of their buildings. These are the school buildings. And then they just finished, you can kind of see the array on the roof of the high school here. It does 110% of their electricity. The way we set these up is that the school doesn't pay any money up front. I bring investors in to invest in these systems. This was about a $7 million system in this case. The school, few schools are in a position to fund those things up front themselves or to get the financing to do that. So we bring groups of investors in. Those investors put up the $7 million project. They operate and maintain that system for an initial 5-year period. The school started saving almost $250,000 a year without spending any money. The school started saving $250,000 a year when we turned the system on. by the time they buy the system out, the investors have to hold for a 5-year period to qualify for investment tax credits from the federal government, 30 to 50% investment tax credits. They have to hold for 5 years. We encourage the school to buy out at 5 years and a day. Once they can 100% finance that buyout, so they're still not going out of pocket. Once they buy the system out, they're gonna save over $400,000 a year at 10.5 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity and at $30 SREC values. When electricity goes up, and it probably is gonna go up into the 20 or 30 cent range or more over the next 40 years of that system, and when SREC values go up from the current 3 cents per kilowatt hour of electricity value to 8, 10, 12 cents, the school's gonna save $1 million a year in a case like this. And for a mid-sized school district, that is phenomenal money. Oh, and they brought sheep in. We fenced all of our, I almost forgot the sheep, I can't forget the sheep. We fenced all of our arrays, so you can see the fence that's around this whole array. They brought, and you have to maintain the ground under the array. You can't let weeds and things grow up over the bottom corner of the panels, because you're gonna be shading the panels and undermining the electricity generation. So they worked with a local farmer and their Future Farmers of America group, and there's an American Solar Grazers Association out there too that consults on this stuff. And they brought sheep in. This is Bob the sheep. He's the head of the sheep, you can tell. They brought sheep in to graze the array, and that's what keeps the weeds down in the fenced area under the solar. You can see that other than this guy who's out in the sun, because he saw the camera, he wanted his picture taken, everybody else would rather spend their time under the panels in the shade. So you're making livestock more comfortable while you're keeping the weeds down under the solar array, and you're creating a more sustainable project overall. That's phenomenal stuff. That makes for a good story. This is the Central Columbia School District, and we've done lots of school districts in Pennsylvania, and I'm talking lots more about them now. This is Central Columbia up in Bloomsburg. When I first looked at this situation 3-4 years ago now, and Jeff Groshek, the superintendent, and I walked out back, we were in his administration building, we walked out back, and he said, he's looking to take these 10 acres of flat, cleared ground that are right behind all of his buildings, and that's where he wanted to put his solar array. I said, Jeff, I'm gonna be talking about this project for a long time, because it's gonna wind up being a model solar project for a school. I won't bore you with all the details, but long story short, in his case, I was able to get him down to 2.4 cents per kilowatt hour of estimated solar generated electricity cost over the next 40 years. So his district is currently, they're actually at 11.7 right now. I was able to get him to 2.4. 11.7 per kilowatt hour of electricity is gonna turn into 20 cents, 30 cents, 40 cents. For the next 40 years, his average is gonna be 2.4 cents. If SREC value, the way that this is calculated, if SREC values go up, which they're going to, if the governor is successful, that 2.4 is gonna go lower yet. For a school district, who's almost every district is fighting their budgets at this point, if you can take one of the major costs that's on a line item in your budget, cut it by 75% and lock it in it for the next 40 years, that's a big deal, and that's what went on. So if you're taxpayers, you're for that. If you're the administration, you're for that. He's using the electricity, and all of the schools that we've done so far are using the electricity and the data from their solar array to educate their students. And part of what I tell school boards is that your students, your students are gonna be living in a much more energy conscious world than I ever did. When I was in high school in the 70s, electricity, you didn't care where it came from, you didn't know where it came from, you didn't care where it came from. It came out of the wall, it was almost free, you were worried about other stuff, right? Those students now are gonna be living in an increasingly energy conscious world, in their homes, in their businesses, in their not-for-profits, in their churches, everywhere. The more you can educate students about electricity and about energy when they're in school, the more advantage you're gonna give them through their lives, is the way it works. So if this were only a break-even proposition for a school, there would be reason to do it to educate your kids about energy. We did, I'm just throwing a couple of projects at you just to show you the kind of the range of things that we've done in the area. This is the Freisinger Auto Group. Gary and Tom met with me 3 years ago now. This is on Carlisle Pike in Mechanicsburg, a couple minutes from where Nadine and I live. These guys put their system up. We finished their system 1.5 years ago. I'll give you the numbers. So that system, the system on 2 of their dealerships is $500,000 worth of total cost. By the time they took a 26% federal tax credit at the time, they took $130,000 off of that. They can take bonus depreciation on a system like this, $145,000 off. There was a PPL solar rebate at the time. There's still a little bit of a rebate. There was a lot more rebate back then. Took another $55,000 off. They were able to get a REAP grant, a Rural Energy Assistance Program grant from the USDA for $126,000. By the time they deducted all that stuff off of that $500,000 system, the system cost them $47,000 net. It's a pretty good deal. So we as a solar developer, and again, we're the largest commercial developer in Pennsylvania, we track all the incentives, we track all the tax stuff, we track all of the accounting stuff, all of those details, and make sure that we bring all that together, because that's how you create a successful solar project. Now, I'm an engineer. I've been involved in nanotech solar development for 16, 18 years now, and when I've talked about energy around the mid-Atlantic, one of the things I say is that solar is really not a technology business. For this stuff, the technology's been around since 1954, and it's gotten cheaper, but it's still the same. Solar is a tax accounting and finance business. If you know how to do the tax accounting and the finance and the incentives and bring all that stuff together the right way, you create successful solar projects, and that's what we do. So in a year and a half, they're gonna pay that back unless electricity cost gets more expensive before then. In a year and a half, they're gonna pay that back, and then they're gonna have free electricity for the next 40 years, or 38 and a half years. This is the Carlisle Fairgrounds. We're gonna start this project this summer down in the Carlisle Fairgrounds. It's $1,300,000 system. The rules have changed a little bit. Instead of a 26% federal tax credit that I showed you a minute ago, it's now 30. Their bonus depreciation is gonna get them $300,000 worth of credit. There was a PPL rebate in their case. That USDA Rural Energy Assistance Program grant went from 25% of total project cost to 50. That's where it is now. That's big. These guys, for a $1,323,000 system that we're gonna start building in July or August, are actually gonna make $122,000 when they put, within a year, when they get their all that stuff back in. They're gonna make $122,000 for putting it up, and then they're gonna have free electricity really for 40 years. That's a God bless America thing, right? If you know how to put this stuff together the right way, you can really make sense out of it. Clearly, their payback is 0 years when they're making money on the system putting it up. Trogs Brewery over in Hershey put up a system that only does 16% of their electricity use, because they use a ton of electricity as a brewery. And they're actually looking to build a warehouse over here, and we're looking to put electricity all over that warehouse as well to get that 16% up to a higher number. They made money on their system. Their 25% investment in the system returned over 200% cash in year 1, so they got all their money back 2 times, and then they're gonna make and save money on their system for the next 40 years. The big advantage for them is a marketing advantage. As a brewery, they're able to now market the fact to 25 to 35-year-old, particularly beer drinkers, that they now make solar-powered beer. And 25-year-olds really want to know that they're drinking solar-powered beer. That marketing approach for Trogs has worked out really, 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 really well. It's a good thing.
Hey Doug?
Yep.
Wouldn't that be the same for Faulkner then with electric
We're
cars?
talking to all of them, absolutely. Actually, Faulkner is kind of partnered with Sioka a little bit, and I've done about half of the whole Sioka portfolio. They're the 8th largest car dealership network in the country. Greg Sioka and I have gotten to know each other really well, and Joe Faulkner is doing a lot of those partnerships with Greg. So he's done a number of those, and that's gonna spill over into the Faulkner dealership network in the not too distant future. And you brought up a great point. It makes particular sense for auto dealerships to go solar, because if they're trying to promote electric cars, which electric car sales are doing this, those customers wanna know that that's a solar powered dealership that they're looking to buy their electric car from. So because they're tied together in their heads, and they should be. So Greg Sioka's plan is to take the drone video of all his different systems that we're gonna shoot for him as we finish these systems up. And he's gonna let those videos of all his solar arrays on his roofs play in all of his showrooms. It just makes sense. It's a great question. UPMC just signed its first contract for a 100% hospital offset system up at Coudersport. You go up as far as you can in PA until you're almost in New York, and that's where Coudersport is. This is the hospital, this is their Cole campus in Caldersport, that's the hospital complex there. Up a hill on a plateau above the hospital is 15 acres of cleared ground that they own. We're gonna put up a 5.5 megawatt, 15-acre array that's gonna power the whole hospital. This is the first major hospital installation in Pennsylvania, and that's remarkable to me. Just like the faith-based community, they ought to be spearheading this. The healthcare community ought to be spearheading renewables, because renewables are gonna save them a ton of money, but renewables are really good for the health of the community. There are a lot of deleterious health effects, and we're having this conversation about our range in the kitchen at home about burning fossil fuels, right? You're burning gas in the house, and that is not a great thing. There are a lot of deleterious health effects to burning fossil fuels. A healthcare systems all over the country, all over the world, should be spearheading renewable energy adoption, because it is legitimately good for the health of the community. These guys are leading the way. I'm on the board, I'm the chair of the board of UPMC in Central PA, puts me on the board of UPMC in Pittsburgh, and Leslie Davis, who runs UPMC, has had a couple of conversations with me. She gets it. She knows that this is gonna be good for the health of the community. She knows that this is gonna give her an advantage in being able to talk to the public about the fact that UPMC is gonna be doing the right thing for the health of the community. That's a good thing. It's gonna take major adopters like UPMC and schools and other community leaders to lead the way in all of this stuff. And in my mind, the faith-based community should be right in that group. It's just the way it works. And I'm almost done with all these, and then I want to talk about the best way to approach your solar array. So this is, just for interest, this is another thing that we're doing all over Pennsylvania right now. 2 years ago, the rules changed to the extent, it used to be that I could only put up a system on a site that would generate what the previous year was 110% of the electricity use on that site. Those rules changed 2 years ago to the extent that I can now excess generate and produce whatever I want to and sell it to the grid at full retail value off of a site. That lets me start going out to farmers to say, I'll tell you what, I'll put up solar, and I'll put up solar at 3-foot arrays, 3-foot minimum height arrays that you can graze sheep or chickens under. And I'll put up solar at a 7-foot minimum height that you can walk under in order to raise crops underneath, or you can graze cattle under there. Or I'll put up an array at a 9-foot minimum height that you can graze horses under, or you can run reasonable amounts of equipment underneath, so that I'll generate electricity from the solar that's on your farm while I let you keep farming. And if you can combine agriculture and electricity, renewable electricity, clean electricity together, and you can actually make the farm more sustainable, more profitable, you only earn about $300 to $900 per acre per year when you farm. And that was a staggering number for me when I first learned that. That's very little money. That's why most independent farmers, smaller farmers, are hanging on by their fingernails, because you earn $300 to $900 per acre per year farming. And if you have a bad weather year, you might not make anything at all. I'm gonna add $1,500 for a 9-foot array per acre per year to have the solar there, or $2,500 per acre per year for a 3-foot array for sheep, in addition to their $300 to $900 per acre per year revenue that they're able to generate from farming. I can save family farms by doing this, while I can put up renewable energy generating stations all over the Commonwealth, all over the country, and make farms more family farms more sustainable, while I'm generating renewable energy. And I still get pushback from community groups and townships every now and then. And that's waning, but I still have to fight that fight. But that fascinates me, that there's an opportunity. This is our house over in Mechanicsburg. 11.3 kW solar array. It powers 75% of our electric use in the house and my electric car that's sitting right there. We're looking to add a porch over the back deck. I'm gonna put solar all over that thing. I'm gonna get up to 100%, and we'll be in good shape. Let's go to your project, and my apologies for all of that explanation of everything else prior. That's good. If you're going to do a solar project, which Steve and I have talked about a couple of times now, and you're moving forward on this, here's the way that I would approach the whole thing. I would really only talk with Pennsylvania installers. Energy's regulated on a state-by-state basis in the United States. Every state has its own energy policy. Every state has its own energy rules. I have watched regional and national and international competitors of ours on major projects make what to me are very obvious mistakes because they just didn't know the rules here. Home court advantage is a big deal when you're dealing in energy because it is regulated on a state-by-state basis. So I would talk to Pennsylvania installers, Pennsylvania companies exclusively, because they're gonna understand what's going on in Pennsylvania better than someone in Connecticut or Massachusetts or New Jersey. I would talk with several companies, and Steve and I think, Steve, you're already talking with several groups, 5 groups, about that. I would check references hard. It gets all down to talking to people who've already done work with these folks. And this is the case with anything you're gonna buy, not just solar, but with anything you're gonna buy. But particularly with solar, nobody understands this stuff. You know, to most of the population, this is brand new. It seems like it only came out of the woodwork 5 years ago, even though the first panel was sold in 1954. It's only been really public, only been really popular for the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And there have been a number of companies that have shown up, thrown a magnetic sign on the side of their pickup truck, and poof, I'm a solar installer. And I've seen pictures of some systems that were put up that were horrendous. Because they didn't know what they were doing, but it was a wildcat that they were out there ripping and tearing doing that. Go talk to people who put their own solar arrays up, go look at the systems that they've done, make sure everything worked out well, you should be in much better shape. Visit those projects, talk with the owners. Your decision should be made based on your reference checks and on the installed cost per watt. The installed cost per watt, how many watts are they putting up? Make sure they're putting up only what you need. Don't let them put up more than you need unless that's the intentional decision that you've made. And I'll talk you through that. Make sure they're putting up what you need, and then look at the dollars per installed watt. So it's basically how many watts are they proposing, and I'll talk you through this when you get to that point. What's the total cost of the system? And basically, what's my dollars per watt cost of the system? That's going to be your decision point. Purchase the system directly if possible, and I think that's the path that you're on because of the endowment that you've got. Be careful of what are called power purchase agreements. There's a lot of companies that will knock on the door of your house, knock on the door of your church, and say, I'll put up a solar array for you on the roof. You don't have to worry about any cost at all. It'll be great, and I'll sell you electricity off of that system that I put up on your roof for the next 25 or 30 years, and you won't have to worry about a thing. I have seen, especially in residential solar, I've seen so many traps where that contract was written so that you might save a little bit initially, and you might save a little bit long term. You're not going to save anything close to what you'd save if you put it up yourself using the right installer at the right cost, took the tax credit yourself, and took the SRECs yourself, those solar renewable energy certificates. That's the way to do it. You want to own these, you want to put it up as efficiently as you can and own it as quickly as you can. That's the way you make and save the most money on solar, and power purchase agreements are neither of those. So that's the way to do it here. Make sure you own the SRECs, I just talked about that, and call me if I can help. That is my manual for doing a solar project, and my contact information is right up over there in the upper right. And that probably took longer than you were planning to spend, and my apologies for taking up so much time on Sunday. Thank you. Other last questions, or are we good?
PP&L still doing those incentives? Some of the
PPL
quotes,
about 2
some of the
years
quotes
ago.
we have, they're in it and some are not.
Yes, so
Okay.
PPL about two and a half years ago put what was it at the time? It was a 30 cent per watt incentive on the street.
Okay.
30 cents a watt was huge.
Oh, yeah.
So the Central Columbia School District that I just showed you a couple of minutes ago, one of the 2 schools that I showed you, we got them $1 million from PPL when they put up their $9 million system. That's a big incentive. I told schools and everyone else that I was talking to at the time, when a 30 cent a watt incentive hit the street, I said, act now, because my experience is that when something that's too lucrative hits the street, it won't last long, and it'll get pulled like that. They went from 30 cents a watt about a year and some ago down to 10 cents a watt. They cut it by a third. About 6 months ago, they took 30 cents a watt down to 3 cents a watt. It's still an incentive, it's still a rebate, but it's 10% of what it was 2.5 years ago. It's still there. And what I constantly tell people is that if you, in doing your analysis, find a set of incentives, tax credits, all the different pieces of the puzzle that fit together to create a solar project. When you see a situation that lines up, go. Don't wait another year or 2 or 3 because maybe this might happen, maybe that might happen. Those things might happen, but other things might go in the other direction as well. So when the planets all line up, when the door opens, walk through it. Don't wait to see a better door.
Along those lines, can you talk about the 30% direct rebate in the current?
Yes, so
Yes.
the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 took what was the 26% federal tax credit for solar. So when you put up solar at your house, at a business, wherever you've got tax liability, you put up solar and it was 26%. It used to be 30, a number of years ago, it was 30%. You get 30% of the cost of the system as a tax credit on your tax bill. So if you had the federal tax liability, you could take 30% of the cost of your system and take that off of your taxes on the bottom. That's great if you have federal tax liability. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And that's why we bring investors who have tax liability into those school projects, because the schools don't pay taxes. One of the things the Inflation Reduction Act did was it took what used to be 30, what had gone down to 26, was gonna go down to 22 and then 10. It took that 26 back up to 30, and it locked it in until 2032. So it's got a 10-year runway from the time that it bumped it back up to 30. And not only is it 30, but there's a couple of 10% adders to that. So you get 30 for doing a solar system, 30% federal tax credit, or now a 30% direct check from the Treasury to you as a not-for-profit. You can do that now, you couldn't do that before. If you live in a low-income community, technically defined or government-defined low-income community, you get another 10%, and you don't here. If you live in what's called an energy community, a gas, coal, oil community, and you might qualify there, you get another 10%. And if you use what are technically defined as domestic produced panels, you would get another 10%. So 30% base with 3 additional 10% adders, some of which you may or may not be able to get. I've got entities that are working on a 50% federal tax credit basis on their projects because they qualify as energy community. The UPMC campus is in an energy community in north central PA, and they're gonna wait another year to get domestic panels before we start ordering and starting the production. So they're gonna get a 50% federal tax credit for their system. That's big. So the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, I'm not gonna advocate candidates here, but what it was on President Biden's case was the largest by far energy initiative, climate change initiative, environmental initiative ever. And it's huge, and the public doesn't really understand the ramifications. It is big, and it's affecting solar projects immeasurably right now.
The tax rebate or the depreciation, the timing of starting in the project is kind of immaterial because you get that after the fact. But if you're looking for grants, you have to your point about aligning the planets, you gotta find those, get them up, applications in for them before you start the project.
Exactly. You have to have, if you're you can't get one of those rural energy assistance programs, those USDA grants as a not-for-profit, you can't get them. For-profits can get them. Those for-profits, Carlisle Fairgrounds, Freisinger Auto that I talked to you about a little while ago, they had to get those award letters in place before they could move at all. If they moved before they got the award letters, they were out of the mix.
And yet the 30% for nonprofits, at least the way I view it, is the sooner you get that as a church, the better. For instance, if we were to start a project now, take 6 months to get there, we would hope to get that direct rebate early in the next year's season. Okay, so that's gonna be important to timing if we go ahead with this.
The sooner you move, the sooner you will get it.
Yes.
But you're gonna get it, that 30% or 40%, you're gonna get that after the fact.
Yep.
There's one of the reasons why when we do schools, we use that investor-owned process, because even if you can get a direct treasury check for that 30 to 50% as a school, you're out of pocket for the cost of this system over the 1.5 years of construction. And a lot of schools either can or don't wanna do that. When we bring investors in, they save the money, and then we let them buy out after year 5. And that way, they can 100% finance at that point, and they never have to go out of pocket.
Doug, what are you seeing as far as the timing of getting the interconnection agreements through with PP&L right now? Because I know that's another big lead time
Well, it
issue.
takes forever.
for the project.
It's 6 to 8 months to get interconnection, responses back to the interconnection application with PPL. And then for a project like this, should take 3 or 4 months to build it.
That's the
Maybe a
longest
little
piece of the
longer.
process.
Say again?
The PP&L thing is probably the longest piece of the process.
PPL is the longest piece of the process, and every now and then PPL gives you numbers that don't completely make sense to me in terms of the interconnection fees that they'll charge for this stuff. And I'm in Harrisburg, I know folks at the PUC,
Yeah.
and we've been able to go in and appeal the cases for school districts and for other users and bring the utility back to, reality on some of their interconnection fees. And we're in the energy wars at this point, and you gotta fight it out,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Couple quick questions. I don't think we have a flat roof here.
We do.
You believe we do?
No, I don't think we do.
You talked about the integrity of the roof. What about the integrity of the roof on that?
Yeah, so before you install, you're gonna wanna look at the age of your roof and how many years are left on your warranty. When I'm doing flat roofs, I'll either do roofs that are 10 years old or newer, or I'll look at roofs that are 25, 30 years old and encourage the school district, let's say, to replace the roof before we put the solar up there. So you're gonna wanna look at how old your roof is and how much warranty is there yet. Replace your roof before you put the solar up there if you need to do that. And make sure you've got a good installer, and talk to people who've had their systems up for a couple of years, make sure they haven't had any issues. You know, when you're doing a sloped roof, you've gotta screw that stuff down to the roof by definition, and you're gonna put a matrix of holes in the roof that if you install correctly, like we did on our house, you'll be fine, never any problems. You gotta make sure you've got an installer that's not just ramming through these things and putting things up quickly, and is gonna undermine the integrity of your roof.
So in 20 or 25 years, you take the panels down, replace the roof, put the panels back up?
Or you look at what the condition of the shingles in your case are under the array, because that array, mind you, is gonna absorb all the energy that ordinarily would be hitting the roof. And frankly, my plan for our house is when we're due for re-roofing, I'm gonna have the roofer look at what's going on underneath there and probably just replace everything else and leave the shingles in place that are under the array, because it's sitting up there in the shade. Right, if you laid up there in the sun 24/7, 365, you'd degrade pretty quickly too. If you laid up under there, under an umbrella 24/7, 365, you're gonna lay up there a lot longer.
Two other quick questions. If you have a ground-based array, how susceptible are these panels to a crazy guy with a sledgehammer?
Yep, crazy guy with a sledgehammer will get them, and you're gonna be insured against that, your property insurance will cover you for that. We've put up about 2.5 million panels now as a developer since 2010. We've done over $400 million worth of solar since 2010. Of those $2.5 million, or 2.5 million panels that we've installed, I've had to replace 6 out of the 2.5 million so far.
Okay, you win.
Yep.
Next question.
It's pretty reliable.
Thank you. Are they, do they break if, accidentally, or?
So a hailstorm will not take panels out unless you get a 10,000 year, size of your fist hailstorm. The 6 panels that I've lost to date are when a commercial lawnmower picked up a rock about the size of my fist and threw it at a panel. They're not designed for that, nor should they be. A hailstorm, a regularly expected hailstorm, and this stuff's all changing as we speak because the weather's getting wilder. Every night when we watch the news, you're seeing weather as the headline story, like 8 times out of 10 right now. It's nuts.
Ohio is nuts.
And so the line is shifting at this point, but they are rated for hail, they're rated for 120 mile-an-hour winds on the roof, they're rated for all the things that you'd normally expect.
Why have utilities not, I think I heard you say they're buying from.
Yeah.
Why are they not installing?
They're not making that investment because for the most part, it's more it's a better return for them to invest in fossil fuel generation than in renewable generation. It's their business, so they're better at that, but there's more return for them to generate, with all the subsidies that they get, there's more return for them to put up their own gas-fired or fossil fuel-fired generation than renewable generation. It's cheaper for them to just go buy the credits. Follow the money in any of these things, we were talking about that before we started. follow the money and you'll figure out why people are doing the things that they're doing around things like this. Just the way it works.
All right, is a solar project, in your opinion, or your facts, profitable without federal grants and neighborhood grants? Does the project fund itself?
Would it stand alone if you took all that stuff away? Yes, if you also took all of the incentives, all the direct tax loopholes, all of the subsidies that you push into the fossil fuel industry, not including the subsidy that lets the fossil fuel industry push that stuff into the environment and let society pay for it, take that one out, take all the other tax stuff, all the other direct payments, all the other incentives to the fossil fuel industry, other than the environmental. They take things off their balance sheet and throw them up into the air. As a business, I've never been able to do that. They can do that as a fossil fuel industry. Take that one away. Let them keep doing that. Take all of their other incentives away and take my incentives away, and I'll compete with them all day long. So the answer is, on a level playing field, absolutely. On the playing field that we've developed over the last 150 years, nope.
I'd like to comment about our roof. If you remember, it was a hailstorm that resulted in this roof being re-roofed. So it is new as of October, November of last year, for those that care. The other thing.
Excellent planning on your part,
Yeah. Internal rate of return. This is something that the solar guys we're talking to throw around a lot, but just for your information, what they do is they take a basis, put the money in the bank, earn 5%. Put the money into solar, you see numbers at 10, 11, or 12% on your money invested. It's an important number. I'm not sure their math is sometimes fun, but.
Look at how they're doing their numbers. It
Yeah,
all depends
that's
on
right.
electricity cost and SREC value.
Right.
Right, same
Yes.
thing?
Just on the rebate, right, just on the rebate depreciation and SRECs, I mean, the payback on solar, what used to be 10 to 15 years, if you just get the rebates, you're down probably in the 3 to 5 range now, which is really, really good. If you get the grants on top of that, what Doug was showing, I mean, you're getting it for almost break even or
Carlisle
1 year,
Fairgrounds is
2
gonna make
years.
$125,000 on their system.
Well, I had a question, bifacial panels?
Yep.
Newer technology, what are you seeing and hearing on that
Yep,
technology?
relatively newer technology. So bifacial panels are exclusively what we use, and bifacial panels have been around for 7 or 8 years now. Every solar panel collects direct sunlight from the top of the panel, that's what it's there for. Bifacial panels came to be about 7 or 8 years ago. The industry realized that if you put glass on the underside of the panel as well as on the top side, instead of an opaque panel back there, you'll pick up ambient light from underneath, and the additional generation you'll get from that extra light that's scattering around and hitting the panel underneath will offset the cost and then some of the additional cost of that piece of glass underneath. So we use bifacial panels. If I'm in a situation with a flat roof that needs to be replaced, I'll encourage the owner of the building to replace that flat roof before I put solar up, and replace that roof, whatever's up there now, with a white membrane roof, because a white membrane is gonna be a reflective membrane. It's gonna scatter light, reflect light back up to the underside of the panels that are at a 10-degree angle. And depending on your CPA's take on this, your CPA and the owner and we will work together, and you can capture some reasonable percentage of the cost of your re-roofing, because it's a white membrane roof that's gonna reflect and become part of the solar array. You can pull some of the cost of that re-roofing, not all of it, some of it, into your solar project and get that 30 to 60% federal tax credit. Well, that's kind of a God bless America thing too.
So
Right?
you answered the second part of the question that I was gonna ask, is how much of a difference is the white versus black
Big.
membrane? Is there the payback to get the bifacial on a black membrane? That
Yes,
was my
exactly,
follow-up.
exactly.
There is, you're
Yes.
saying, okay.
That's the albedo, the reflectivity of a roof matters a lot, right? You see the bumper sticker that says albedo matters. Right? That's what it's for. Other questions?
I'd like to know how many of us have solar on our homes.
Well, it's a good question. I can't answer that, but you can.
Well, yeah. Anybody
We have a lot
solar?
in our neighborhood.
We're fighting with our homeowners association to allow it.
Oh,
Call me
good.
on that.
I'm the only one here.
No, we
Nobody-
did.
Right now.
Pheasant
There you
Road.
go, Kathy.
Oh, you had it on
Pheasant
Pheasant
Road.
Road? Oh, great, that was
We,
a long time ago.
One of the questions we are asking our suppliers, for your information, is what do you do if people in the congregation decide they like this, they like the theory, hey, I wanna play, you know, put me on your list. They do give rebates as a direct result for the congregation members if and when we put it on this route. Okay, so it's something to think about. If you are thinking about it and you wanna join this party, okay? That's the way, that's something we can look at. Whoever we ultimately pick, assuming the proposal goes through, will consider the fact that as members of this congregation, you get a reference rebate. I'll call it.
Yeah, I love
Do
that.
you have an idea of what it would cost for a typical home to buy it?
For our place,
People that you deal with or know about?
yep. For our place, it costs, we did an 11.5 kW system on the roof of our house, which does 75%. This is a couple years ago now. I did it with Tesla Energy when they were doing this without selling you a battery too, and now they won't do it unless they sell you a battery, so I don't use them anymore. But it cost us $29,000 to put up the system, and I got 30% tax credit, so the net on it was like 19,000. And the payback was, and I bought it myself. I could have financed it. We bought it outright, $19,000 net, and I'll pay that off in our case in about 7 years, and it'll be free electricity from that point forward. You can find people who will charge you 2 to 3 times that much if you're not careful. Yeah, unfortunately, people will knock on the door of your house and they'll want to have you sign that day. I don't know anything that I'd sign the same day that somebody talks to me about it. That's the play in the solar industry, and that's part of what's given the solar industry a really bad name. You've got to really sort your way through this, like Steve and your group are doing right now, and find the right people, because it's really easy to get into this, and it's really easy to do a really poor job of it and make a bunch of money.
Wendy, you had something?
I was just gonna say that, we talked about going to consistory, but we had also spoken at our last, somewhat confusing congregational meeting, that I think it's also gonna be congregational input. Is that right, Doug, for congregational input for whether we go with solar or not?
We're getting the recommendation from,
Right.
consistory, at consistory, so we'll talk then about
Okay,
how we do that. I think because it's through the request money, it doesn't have to get congregational approval. But we'll probably have a segment during the church life segment to talk a little bit about it, have some feedback.
thank you.
With the governor's proposal for 30% reduction, 35, is there going to be incentives coming there for nonprofits to?
So the governor's proposal is to take the mandate in Pennsylvania from a current 8% up to 35%. The beauty of that is that you're not gonna have to worry about, should I apply for something? Should I wait to do my project because I'm waiting for the governor to get that all in place so I can apply before I go? Because once I go and if I don't apply first, I won't get it. The beauty of this is that he's looking to take 8% renewable mandates up to 35%. That's gonna take those SREC values from 3 cents a kilowatt hour now up to 6 cents, 8 cents, 10 cents, 12 cents a kilowatt hour. It won't matter when you do solar. If you did solar 10 years ago, it's gonna be tremendously to your benefit. It's one of the reasons why that's just a great thing to do, is that it's gonna benefit everyone who's going to go solar, but benefit everyone who's gone solar too. Grant programs, and there's some grant programs for solar for schools being talked about right now. You know, I appreciate what they're trying to do, but they're gonna reward people who are going to go solar and leave everyone who's gone solar out of the game. I don't love that. When you've got a project or a program like the one that Josh is talking about now, you're gonna be able to benefit everyone who's ever gone solar and everyone who's gonna go solar in the future, and you're gonna promote more solar adoption.
Just one quickly, when you talk about the net metering, you're paid back the same amount of money per kilowatt that you
For
are
retail
buying.
value.
So as a homeowner, I have the choice of buying electricity from X, Y, and Z at 9 cents or renewable at 15 cents. If I'm buying energy at 15, my my benefit is 15 cents
Oh.
back, is there a limit to?
Good question. So what I meant by full retail is the default commercial retail price for each utility.
Okay, so the
So
default.
it is not like, what am I buying it at? Have I signed up for Green Mountain Energy?
Right,
or am I-
exactly, that's what I was thinking.
It's the default commercial, it's the price to compare, it's called, and I think that shows up on your electric bill. The
Gotcha.
price to compare, capital P, capital C, is the value that you'll be paid back.
Gotcha.
And in a lot of cases, that's more actually than you're actually contracted to buy for, right? You're buying under the price to compare, but you'll be reimbursed at the price to compare.
My question is, you had talked about these, battery banks that you sometimes would put on. Of course, we would have one of those, but if things go wrong, like you said, how you store it on the grid and you get it back, but if the battery price comes down, you put those battery packs on. If we do solar this year, and that starts to happen, can we later add that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, they're
It's like
completely
that's-
independent systems.
You have to do that, right?
Yep, yep. So, the two reasons to put a battery in place when you've done solar are to hedge against, the legislature taking net metering out, where you'd wanna store your own instead of, if you're gonna sell it wholesale at 3-4 cents instead of at full retail at 11-12 cents, you'd wanna have a battery system in place if net metering goes out. The other reason to put a battery in place is it's kind of the equivalent of a gas or diesel generator that you'd have sitting behind the garage. Instead of having that as your emergency power supply, if you have a battery array in the garage or somewhere on the property, that'll take care of your power when the electricity goes out. Now, you can already buy a Ford F-150 Lightning truck that's got a bi-directional charger that you can install in your garage, so that you install it in your garage. When everything's fine, you charge your truck using that bi-directional charger. If your power goes out, you run that battery in your truck backwards into the house and you power your house for a couple of days. That's where things are going, and that's why I don't counsel schools or homeowners or anyone to put separate battery systems in place, because I can see where things are going. Every electric vehicle that's made after a while is gonna be made with a bi-directional charger, and we're gonna wind up with, think about it, we're gonna wind up with this whole completely distributed storage system all over the country that's gonna make us more terrorist resistant and weather resistant, because everyone's gonna be able to store their own energy on site and power their own home or business on the batteries that are in their vehicles. Energy's profoundly changing right now, and it's a really interesting time to be around. While we're driving off the edge of a cliff in one big SUV together. That's the way it's working.
Anybody have any other questions?
Steve got my number. I'm right over in Mechanicsburg. I'm here to help anytime you need it, and I really thank you for all your time. It's been fun.
Thank you.
I want you to think about one other point though. He hit on the batteries. Batteries are a thing. And I'll try and do this in a logical way, but the sun is responsible for all fossil fuels. Whether you're talking the tree that you burn in your fireplace, or the tree that decayed as coal or as oil or as gas. The sun did that. You've got a giant battery under your feet, okay? Coal, gas, it's there. The problem is you're consuming it much faster than the millions of years it took for it to occur. So when you look at that, we have a giant battery, it's there. How fast we're using it is what's causing a lot of the trouble. But think about the fossil fuels, where they came from, and ultimately it was solar. Okay? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.